The US Treasury and IRS are requiring teleworking employees to return to the office for half of their working days.
There definitely is now two types of, let's say, citizens that work for the IRS.
I think it also will mean that the IRS will struggle to compete with other organizations in terms of specialized skills.
So DOD, it's called, the article is DOD updates telework policy for the first time since 2012. 12 years ago, we had a policy. We've gone through COVID, and they come up with this amazing new policy, which is telework is a workplace flexibility.
I think this is probably driven partly by the DOD have real challenges with certain types of recruitment. And I'm not sure the IRS has the same level of challenges. It's not as much as a pain point. Welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere, where we offer proven approaches and solutions to your most critical hybrid leadership challenges.
I'm your co-host on the west coast of California, Mitch Simon.
And I'm your co-host on the Iberian Peninsula, Brett Putter.
And we invite you to join us to Team Anywhere. Hello and welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere. I'm your co-host, Mitch Simon, on the west coast of California and on the Iberian Peninsula. It's hard for me to say that. And on the Iberian Peninsula is Brett Putter. How are you today, Brett?
Mitch, I'm good. I'm very good. I'm super excited about this podcast because we've got these two sort of competing forces that are ultimately a really, really amazing encapsulation of what's happening in the world right now. So yeah, I'm really excited about this podcast. I'm slightly annoyed about the weather because it's got really, really cold, and the houses in Portugal are designed to keep the heat out, not the heat in.
Yeah, it sounds like the same designers here in California.
Yeah. So, but I'm good. Thanks. Good. Thanks. It's good to be back on the show.
Great. So we have two articles that you have directed us to. One of the articles talks about the IRS and their strategy for, let's say, teleworking or work from home. And the other article is from the DOD. So we have both of them are the United States government. One is the IRS, collects our taxes. One is the DOD, which protects us. Actually uses the money from the taxes to protect us. And it looks like they have really different strategies for telework, for working from home, from working from anywhere. And what we want to do today is discuss these two articles and ask some questions. And ask, what might be the thinking behind their let's say their decisions, and what might be some of the challenges and what we might recommend given. So why don't you start out, Brett, with the first article, which is the Treasury, the IRS. They set a 50% return to office target for employees to meet government-wide, and they put it in quotes, government-wide standards. Tell us more about that and break that down for us.
Yeah, so the US Treasury and IRS are requiring teleworking employees in mainly the Washington, D.C. area to return to the office for half of their working days. And this starts in May. And oddly, the decision only affects executives, managers, and non-union employees with existing telework agreements. And basically, the agency has justified this move by claiming it already meets the government-wide 50% in-office standard. And it's really, in the article, is emphasizing the importance of senior staff presence for knowledge sharing and policy decisions. The big thorn in the ointment here is the National Treasury Employees Union, which criticizes the decision and rightfully, in a way, argues that it lacks justification, it's going to impact recruitment and retention, and it contradicts the benefits of teleworking experience and the experiences learned during the pandemic. And so I think the first thing that stands out for me is this idea is that it's mainly the Washington metro area, because it's this home to the IRS headquarters, and there's this high concentration of leadership and senior professionals. And I think this is the first thing that really stands out for me in this article is you're you're creating this us and them. And then there's the union side, because they haven't completed the negotiations. And the union believe this 50% number is arbitrary. The union believes that it'll affect the ability to hire and fill the necessary vacancies and retain skilled employees, which will force the people who have kind of moved to apply elsewhere or retire. And even the Treasury's own assessment of teleworking it provided to Congress a few months ago found that there was no evidence that telework created a negative impact on retention, recruitment, or organizational performance. So if I run that past you, Mitch, sort of what are your thoughts? I mean, you pay these guys taxes.
That's right. I pay taxes. What I first think about is a couple things, which is there definitely is now two types of, let's say, citizens that work for the IRS. If you decided to dwell in the metro area, then you're mandated that half of you are going into the office 50% of the time. And if you're in the union, you're not mandated. So I could have a neighbor who's in the union, and my neighbor doesn't have to go into the work 50% of the time, but I do have to go to work for 50% of the time. Then what gets more complicated is, let's say I have a brother or a friend who lives outside Washington, D.C. He or she doesn't have to come into the office 50% of the time, but I'm being penalized by living where I live to go into the office 50% of the time, if in fact that's something that I don't want to do, or I've got kids that I need to take care of, or I've got other things, or the cost of transportation, or however long it takes me to get to the office. So I immediately think about how do you hold meetings? How do you create culture? How do you provide the things like belonging and understanding and fairness with this rule? On the other hand, what I think about is what is there anything there in terms of, once I get into the office, is it going to be a better situation for me? Is there any leadership or management training that is going to have people deal well with this situation? Because this situation is pretty complicated. Now, it's not that complicated when you compare it to a lot of other companies that I know, which is that, there are many companies with satellite offices, and I've done some workshops where the home office people do have to come to the office. But if they're not living within, let's say, San Diego, they don't have to come to the office. Mm-hmm. They come in a lot less. Now, with that, they've actually put some programs together to actually build the culture so that there is that, let's say, connection and belonging and bonding. But outside of just a statement, it's 50% in the DC area, I'm not betting so much on this culture, and I'm actually betting on what we're reading in both these articles, that people are going to run for the hills when given a better opportunity.
Yeah, I think there's that 1 foot out of the door. So, come and work for my company. You can do it flexibly, and we'll pay you the same salary. Okay, don't even have to. I'd like an increase in salary, but if I can work flexibly and I can deliver from home, great, or from wherever I want to be. And I think the other piece about this is the compliance, and I'm not sure how compliant IRS employees are, but I know that if you look at any mandated work environment, the only ones where compliance is really, really working is companies like Citibank, where they actually are measuring when you tap in and when you tap out, and your bonus is going to be partly calculated on you being in the office. Other than that, managers are aware that their people have lives outside of work and are almost breaking the company law to allow their people to go and pick up the kids from school or to go and do what they need to do. Like that whole, that's great. You've mandated it. So what? There's this fundamental element of you. It's almost doesn't make sense. Why? Why is it not for everybody? Why is it just DC? What don't you trust? So you don't trust me to do the work that I need to do as a senior leader, because you're getting all the senior leaders in. You don't trust your senior leadership to work. You don't trust your senior leadership to be capable of moving things forward when they did quite comfortably. I'm assuming during the pandemic and more recently. So it's just it adds so many additional unnecessary questions to me as a leader in that environment.
Yeah, and then one would suspect that these leaders have to go through some understanding, some training, some explanation, and a great awareness of what our culture is in this a little bit arbitrary setup.
Well, you will have more than one culture now.
Yeah, you're going to have several cultures.
And you're probably going to have to start dealing with proximity bias, because the people who can get into DC are going to go into DC because that's where the leadership are. And they'll be able to move their careers along and move their projects along because they will get in front of leadership easier. And then the people who are further away are going to feel like second-class citizens because they can't do that. And they're not getting the promotion because they're not in the office. So you could just feel how it's such a nasty soup.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when you think about much of the work, I can imagine much of the work at the IRS, I'm sure, is a lot of, single focus work, right? Because I'm imagining as you're going through tax returns, it's not too much collaborative work. Definitely there's probably collaborative work, but I'm just thinking that much of it is really that you could do on your own. That really doesn't require me coming into the office, except for a mandate that says 50% of you need to be in the office. Now, I definitely buy into the fact that if I'm brand new, I need to go into the office, perhaps to learn, although training could be provided online. I need to get mentored, things like that. But after that phase, the question that becomes is, why am I still in the office? Unless there's a huge culture of we're going to mentor, we're going to coach, and that's what we're all about. But we really don't. It's definitely not in the article, and I'm not sure. I haven't heard of the IRS being the greatest culture of any company out there to work with. And then again, goes into, because when we hit our next article, it goes into attracting talent. And so if I'm living in DC, here's another one. If I'm living in DC and there's a mandate, that's not as attractive to me as if I'm living outside of DC and there is no mandate.
Exactly.
With same salary. Yeah. So it does cause a lot of issues that I'm sure that they are going to deal with in May of 2024. And it's something where they're going to need a lot of support to make that work.
Yeah, I mean, to summarize, there's the challenges are, the key points really are, it's creating this two-tiered system, which is probably going to result in some sort of disenfranchised feelings, second-class citizens. There's this, as you mentioned, the recruitment and retention challenges. It's going to probably increase the cost of filling vacancies because there's such a fierce competition out there for people. I think it also will mean that the IRS will struggle to compete with other organizations in terms of specialized skills. If you need those specialized skills, would you go and work at and you're in DC, would you go and work at the IRS where it's mandated, or would you go and work for another company where you can either not be in the office or be in the office once a month or something at your leisure? And I think lastly, I think the effect on work-life balance, it's not always qualitative, but it will disrupt work-life balance for many employees. And I guess all of this is made worse by the fact that there's there's not really a data driven justification for this, because their own data finds that there's no negative impact. So yeah,
there is no data justification. There's in fact the opposite, that the data says that there is no impact on productivity when people are mandated to be in the office.
Yeah.
Hey, we're taking a quick break to remind you to support our podcast by hitting the subscribe button and leaving us a review. Your feedback means the world to us, and it helps us continue to bring you more engaging and thought-provoking content for leadership and remote work.
Yeah. Well, we've looked at the IRS.
Let's look at DOD. All right, so DOD, it's almost like a different country. It's almost like a different government. It's the same government. The DOD upward. So the DOD, it's called, the article is DOD updates telework policy for the first time since 2012. So 12 years ago, we had a policy. We've gone through COVID, and they come up with this amazing new policy, which is telework is, they basically call it, telework is a workplace flexibility. It's not an entitlement. It's not a benefit. It just is. It's something that is a flexibility. So if someone asks for it, and what's really interesting about the article is they've already trained the managers on not only to support a worker who wants to telework or wants to have a remote work arrangement. They go through the distinctions between the two, but I'll save everyone for that. They're training their managers not only to support employees who want to telework, they're actually training their managers so that when new positions come up, that they seriously consider how to make that position a telework position. So it's flexibility. It's just that's part of the culture. Now, why are they doing this would be the second question. And why are they doing it is basically the same thing that was brought up by the NTEU, right? The National Tax Employees Union, as you said, so the same exact arguments. It's almost as if they were written by the same person. They actually were written around the same month, but not the same person. It's that it's very difficult to find and retain employees. And the DOD is competing with the Raytheons of the world. And in order to compete with the Raytheons of the world, they have to offer what the Raytheons have, which is flexibility. So I think what's happening is, and they talk about the data here, the data shows that people want flexibility, that workplace productivity is not impaired. The data also shows that they're actually missing employees. They are not, I think they're getting 1 out of every 4 positions for cyber filled. So they really are. No,
it's 1 out of 4 remains vacant.
1 out of 4. Oh, 1 out of 4. Okay. 1 out of 4 remains vacant for cyber. So how do you do that is to provide different opportunities, like making it flexible so you can work wherever you are. So you read this article and you say, wow, seems like they really get it. Now, of course, the other question you might be asking is, well, isn't DOD have a lot of security? So there are questions, there are mandates where it's hyper high security that yes, you actually have to be in a facility. Now, you don't have to necessarily go in the office because there are a lot of places that you can go that actually have high security. That might be closer to where you live. So this just seems to me as they got it right. I mean, what do you think, Brett?
Yeah, I was really surprised by the differences between the two. The fact that they're I think this is probably driven partly by the DOD have real challenges with certain types of recruitment, and I'm not sure the IRS has the same level of challenges. It's not as much as a pain point. I think that could be one point, but actually, the fact that they want managers to not only to actually remove boundaries, to remove issues for people to become telework or remote workers. They want them to promote this. They want people to be able to really take advantage of it. And I think, this is clearly somebody's thought it through. And I don't think it's just about who you recruit, but they're seeing that there is this future of work. The organizations that they compete with are moving along these lines. And I actually believe that the DoD could get one up on the Raytheons and McDonnell Douglases of the world by doing a better job. The Lockheed Martins and so on, they could really take a jump on those organizations.
How could they take a jump? How would they make, in addition to making work flexible, what else would you recommend that they do to compete against the Raytheons of the world?
Yeah, so I think one of the the amazing things is that that the DoD is saying that they're leaving it up to the heads of departments to develop, implement, and operate telework and remote work programs in accordance, obviously, with the other DoD policies. But it's up to the department heads and managers. And I think where they could really take that jump is by training their department heads to really understand what flexible working is, what remote working is, what the challenges are, and how to optimize and really become great leaders in this new flexible work environment. I think if you think about the types of managers that'll be at the DoD, they've been managers typically most of their lives in an office environment, so that's what they're going to know. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to be easy for them to transition into it being really, if you compare to a well-run remote work organization, I think they're going to need a lot of training to get close to that.
What type of just off the top here, what type of issues would be in that training that would have them become better remote managers?
So it depends. It'll depend on the individuals, but often you will get managers in the office who are used to being input-based managers. So what are you doing? What are you working on? Where are you at? How many hours are you working? What's your input? And actually, that in a flexible work environment, that's quite detrimental to the well-being and the productivity of your team. So moving from an input-based leader to an outcomes-based leader and building a system that allows you to be outcomes-based, I think is super critical. When you're in an office, you don't think about needing to do lots of one-to-one meetings, because you see Jack and Jill and Bob and Mary, every second day, and you bump into them and hi you. And I think in a remote work environment or flexible work environment, getting those one-to-one meetings going and building the right structure for one-to-ones and understanding how to use one-to-ones not as a productivity evaluation, but actually as a how are you, and building that connection and that social capital outside of the office environment. And I think that there is an element of balancing synchronous and asynchronous communication, because when you're in the office, as we are now, you expect me to respond immediately and we're in sync in our communication. Mm-hmm. But actually, effective remote working requires you to find a balance between synchronous and asynchronous communication. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be thought through, and it's almost like the managers need to be given a framework to say, okay, this is where you start, and over the next 2 to 3 years, because it's not going to happen overnight, over the next couple of years, this is how you transform into an effective, flexible work leader.
That's great. I also believe there's the leader element of it. And if we go back to the IRS, right, because let's imagine with the IRS, which has all of its complexity, you've got the 50% of the 50% mandate. So let's imagine there's the person who has to be in the office 2.5 days a week and is at home 2.5 days a week. There's the person who is remote, who's never there. Then there's the union person who lives next to the person who doesn't have to go in, and you've got that whole trust issue. It's how are we as team members going to really truthfully, authentically talk about these things and coordinate action based on where people are going to be at different times, and then just accept that that's our reality, and still be able to work within that reality, both with the synchronous and asynchronous communication, but mostly on making sure that we have our eye on the ball. We have our eye on what is the purpose of our work here. We all believe in the purpose. We all belong. We feel that sense of belonging. Getting that right definitely needs to come from the manager. It also needs to come from the team members themselves.
Yeah, I do think there is a team element to this that is critical, and a manager element. I think if you mandate, and I've seen this happen with more than one client, where you mandated to be in the office X days a week, but nobody's in the office on the same days.
Right.
So the office feels like a desert,
mm-hmm.
Because you're in there and you've got your headphones on, mm-hmm. And nobody else is in there, or the people you just don't interact with anybody. So that team element of, are we going to go in this week, and when are we going to be in, and make sure we're in together, and then hopefully your union colleague, your unionized colleague is okay to come in. It adds to that complexity. But I also believe that from an IRS point of view, if the IRS want to get this right, they too are going to have to train their leaders, because hybrid working still means that 50% of the time people are going to be working and leading remotely. Mm-hmm. And we know how to lead in an office environment, but I would almost be able to guarantee that not a single member of the IRS management or leadership teams have ever worked in a remote work environment that was born remote, that was remote from the outset, that was designed for remote work discipline and remote work success. So I think both organizations need to their leadership team, if they want to make a success out of this, have to go through a form of education and training. And their managers, who are going to be taking the brunt of working out when people are in the office, out of the office, or how to motivate these disparate groups of people who are all over the place, they're the ones who are going to take on more responsibility and more complexity, and they're also going to have to be trained to deal with these challenges.
Great. Well, before we go out, just share with us the last company, or the type of the company that you've worked with last, to train these hybrid managers, and some of the takeaways that you had from that training.
So I think it's a large financial institution, global financial institution. The wonderful feeling, the wonderful experience from my point of view was actually the first cohort who went through the training, coming back and saying, wow, it feels like there's a weight lifted off my shoulders. Because I can understand the difference between when things are not going well because of the way we're doing stuff, and the things that are not going well because of the hybrid complexity, because of the remote complexity, and we can separate them now, and we can now work on. It's not now like it's not a soup. We can see the vegetables in the water, mm-hmm. And so that really for me was incredibly rewarding, but actually, funnily enough, because each manager is different, you get different managers who latch on or appreciate different things. So, some managers who are naturally coaches aren't so attracted to the idea of becoming more outcomes based because they already are coaches and outcomes based. But the ones who are more micromanager types go, okay, I can see where I'm struggling. Okay, micromanagement is not ideal. It's not going to be easy for me to let go, but I have to learn if I want to be good at this.
That's great. Well, perhaps in our next podcast, where we could learn more about the bank and some of the insights that the leadership got. That'd be great. Well, Brett, thank you so much. And I've really enjoyed this podcast. And again, if you've loved this podcast and there's a lot of insights in it, please share it with your friends, your colleagues, family. We'll see you next time on our next episode of Team Anywhere.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more engaging content from our podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share the video with your friends so they can join the conversation too.